Come join us on May 17th and 18th. Jay Martin, CEO of Cambridge House, will be hosting the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference with former Prime Minister of Canada Stephen Harper and Felipe Calderón, the former President of Mexico, as guest speakers, and over 100 macro finance keynote speakers, including myself, 225 commodity investment opportunities, and over 5,000 investors. There's a chance to meet in person, share ideas, and see how the world is being redefined. Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. A real treat today. A big thank you to Red Cloud for once again providing two excellent guests. And it's a special day whenever we get to have an equity mining analyst on. And we have from Red Cloud, Timothy Lee, who's going to share his insights. And we're going to talk about the nickel market. Obviously, it's been big in the news. We've seen a lot of big headlines in the last little while, and there's lots of macro political tension and intrigue and development going on that's reshaping the nickel market. So a perfect time to be able to have an analyst come on, walk us through the whole macro outlook, what to expect, and also maybe narrow down some companies. And of course, we'll be joined by Mark Selby from Canada Nickel a little bit later. But welcome, Timothy Lee. Pleasure to have you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for having me today, Andrew.
Oh, we're definitely looking forward. And, I think we've got a lot of journalists on our show, and a lot of them kind of would look and go, oh, okay, what's the deal with nickel? Like, where does it come from? Who's got some? Of course, Russia, they would see has a big influence there. So maybe kind of map us out on a large scale, the use of nickel, why we care, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So the largest use for nickel is still stainless steel production, but a obviously growing area is for batteries, and for particularly for electric vehicles, as they do use a fair amount of nickel in those batteries. And obviously we've seen Tesla and Elon Musk talk quite a bit about securing nickel supply, because if we want to have as many electric vehicles as we'd like to have a more greenhouse gas friendly economy, we're going to need a lot of nickel to provide for those batteries, much more than what is produced currently.
Yeah, so obviously the alloy and the stainless steel, but the electroplating, and then of course it's used as a catalyst. But that chain of custody or supply is really starting to become quite an issue. And certainly we saw it years ago when we were talking about cobalt, and Apple was looking at the DNC, but that has a whole host of issues. But now we see this now more importantly with Elon Musk, and whenever he speaks about anything, the world listens. When he was talking about lithium, but of course he was talking about nickel. Was it last year or so?
Yeah. Yes, talking quite a bit about nickel, and they've signed several deals with companies to sort of offtake agreements to lock up future supply as well.
And that seems to be the big kind of push now, is seeing a lot of different industry, ones that you weren't expecting. We've seen some like hedge funds come in and buy lithium and things in the past, but we've seen like Ford and BMW come into Lake Resources and things like that for lithium. But the nickel market here, I think that before we jump too much into just Canada, looking around the world, and if you are a major producer, end user, especially if you're making batteries, you want to know, how do I get this out of the ground securely without too much supply chain issues? Because we've seen how much it costs to like ship things around right now, and I don't see that changing. It's certainly not in the near future. But maybe kind of walk us through what you see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there have been big shifts over the last several decades in terms of where a lot of the supply comes from. As these nickel laterite projects have come online, Southeast Asia has become the largest producer. When you look at the top producing countries, 3 out of the top 4 are Southeast Asia: Indonesia, Philippines, New Caledonia. And that that largely goes to China for stainless steel and battery metals and so on. So, there's definitely an interest in supply elsewhere. And then the other of the top 4 producing countries is Russia, with Norilsk, and, they're a major producer. So, with recent geopolitical events, there is a lot of interest in finding supplies from elsewhere. And, that includes, North American countries. We have production in Canada and some a little but limited amount from the United States, but also, South Africa has long been a producer from the Bushveld complex, and Australia, especially Western Australia, has long been a sizable producer, as well as some laterite projects in the Caribbean and Brazil and different places. So, but there is certainly an interest with as you're seeing the lay of the land now and where the nickel's coming from, you definitely have a rising interest in projects from Western countries, and particularly, if we want to have these electric vehicles, and as well as the stainless steel and other things we need for infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen just the infrastructure alone. I mean, that's not as exciting to talk about, but we know that the U.S. needs a massive amount, including Canada, of infrastructure, and there's an infrastructure plan in place. But everyone likes the battery story because that really speaks to the future, our long-term vision of a cleaner, greener kind of approach to the world, and securing good projects that are close. I think that's got to be key on a lot of end users, whether it's Tesla or whatever company on North American soil, because as you said, it's so much easier to ship if you're from Indonesia or Malaysia straight to China, and you've got an open market, you just sell it. It's an easy transaction. It's a little bit more difficult and costly to ship it all the way over to somewhere in the U.S.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And and then you look at smelting capacity as well, and all of that, and that's another key factor, is there aren't new smelters being constructed, or as many processing plants having been constructed in North America. They've in fact been shut down over the years. That plays a role. If you're not processing the concentrates, then that's going to tend to go to the markets where there is more processing as well.
Now, before I want to ask you a bit more about the processing, but maybe we could just take a step back to talk about the price, because we've seen, like, the last year, a good steady chart. Of course, we had that huge spike about a month ago now in price, but it seems like nickel's kind of settled down at a nice kind of band, at least in the last month, which is a nice higher trading band, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's a healthy price. I mean, you're looking at roughly $15 a pound, plus or minus. That's a nice price, well above where sort of the average has been over recent decades. Minus those couple of spikes up to the $20 kind of range.
Yeah,
and definitely allows projects, companies to look at bringing projects online. If you have, you have projects that maybe you weren't so sure about the economics before, they certainly might look robust at $15 nickel. As well as the other metals that often occur with nickel. You're looking at copper, cobalt, and the PGMs, the platinum group metals, often occur together, and they're all dominantly at pretty healthy prices here.
Yes, and that's a good point to step in and narrow down our focus, because I've kind of the last few years thought a lot of majors want to see that they want to come home and find stable political and trusted sources of highly regulated as well. And that's the other thing too, is that you want to find projects that have strong regulatory framework when you're looking at this ESG, because I think the days of that could be a very big factor moving forward. I really, as much as people want to complain this way or that, whatever your opinion, it's going to be very important. And looking at projects from that perspective, from a carbon perspective, I think people will start to see that projects as well. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there are different factors here, because you have the geopolitical, you do have the environmental impact too of mining and processing, and how these projects are different. Some of those laterite projects, you're you're scooping basically soil off the surface. So some people may have environmental concerns about the impact there on in some tropical islands of that, kind of mining, and then the processing. That processing is energy intensive, and quite often you're producing basically what's called pig nickel, which is sort of an iron nickel alloy that's more geared toward the stainless steel business. But there's really thoughts about what is the energy intensity of producing metals, and with nickel that's certainly the case. With some of the sulfide projects, you may not have as much of an environmental impact locally at the mine site.
I think this is a big opportunity for Canada because we're very conscious. I mean, most in North America, they're very keen on this shift, and they want to see it's done correctly. I believe we've got a very strong regulatory body and goals and milestones for companies to attain. Maybe we can kind of walk us through the different belts, the different areas, so people go. I believe Canada is a resource country, and it has incredible opportunity, and there's lots of forgotten companies that are making a comeback that people should be aware of and can kind of fit this overall macro theme, political theme, where large companies can say, listen, we should be focusing more on strongly regulated countries that are clean, are working towards the same kind of goal together. Where are some of the places in Canada that we should be thinking about?
Sure. So maybe actually, I think there's a slide maybe we could pull up that
yes.
have a few of the projects there and kind of the camps in North America. When we start looking at nickel mining here, there's a rich history of nickel mining in Canada. And we'd really start first and foremost talk about the Sudbury district in Ontario that has a long history of nickel mining and has been the top nickel production area. And then second, the Thompson Nickel Belt over in Manitoba that has a rich history of mining and still some mining today. Both those areas have major mining companies involved, as well as juniors that are looking at bringing some projects forward, either brownfields or greenfields projects as well, because you have that mining infrastructure and all of that. And then you do have other mines, sizable mines in operating today in Voisey's Bay and Raglan. And as well, looking on the U.S. side at the Eagle mine, which is the one primary nickel mine operating in the United States today in northern Michigan. And so you have those established mines, but when you're looking at growth, you need to look to new frontiers. And again, on the U.S. side, a big area of interest is in northern Minnesota with the Duluth complex and the Tamarack project, where there are projects. There's no mining yet. There's a history of iron ore mining in that region, but you do have some regulatory challenges because the state hasn't had as much mining, and so there are challenges with bringing some projects forward. But there are big deposits there. But then you look back in Canada, and you've got the Ring of Fire area that obviously was in the news with Norwant being acquired recently by Whaloo Metals. And then you're looking perhaps at an old camp but a new camp in Timmins. Timmins has a rich history of mining, obviously more on the gold side, as well as some other base metals, copper and so on. And there's been a limited amount of nickel mined there, but that may be a growing area of interest. There are bigger projects that some companies are looking to bring forward that may establish Timmins as a sizable nickel mining camp as well. Maybe having a little bit of technical difficulties here, but probably reconnect. So anyway, maybe I'll talk.
Today's company present.
There we
Today's company presentations are brought to you by Red Cloud Financial Services and the team at Red Cloud Vancouver. Red Cloud Financial Services is your preeminent source for mining industry opportunities. The team provides a unique tailored marketing program dedicated to reaching the right people from its mining-focused global network, giving clients access to industry-leading events and conferences, retail and institutional marketing, plus an in-house growth-driven digital agency. Red Cloud Financial Services has access to some of the mining industry's most notable companies and CEOs. Tune in every Thursday at 4:15 p.m. Eastern, 1:15 p.m. Pacific for weekly corporate presentations. For more information, visit redcloudfs.com.
Okay.
There we go.
How are you today?
Great, thanks, Tim. How are you?
Not too bad at all. Not too bad at all. Andrew was just having a little bit of technical difficulties there, but maybe we can chat a little bit. It was kind of perfect timing, as I was just talking about mining camps in North America for nickel and kind of the established camps, but looking at new frontiers as well. I just talked about Timmins, and talking about Timmins as obviously an established mining camp overall, with all the mining infrastructure but it's been more gold, copper, and other things, a little bit of nickel mining, but obviously now, potentially an emerging major nickel mining camp as well. And, it's kind of a good time to pass it on to you to talk a little bit. We talked a little bit about the general nickel market, but you can talk more about what you're working with in Timmins, and obviously the projects, the established project you have, but also now you've accumulated this portfolio of exploration properties as well.
Sure. I mean, the nickel market, with demand from the EV sector. We're going to need double the amount of nickel by the end of this decade versus where we were in 2020. And most importantly, a lot of these new nickel consumers are looking for low carbon nickel and large amounts of it that can come to market by 2030. So, we were very fortunate just over 2 years ago to make Crawford nickel discovery. Just up the highway from Timmins, you've got all the major infrastructure you need to build a mine in place. And as you said, Timmins is a very established mining camp. So in terms of community and First Nations support for mining, again, an excellent location. So in just over 2 years, we've proven up Crawford as the largest sulfide discovery since the early 1970s. We completed a PEA a year ago. We're on track for a feasibility study by the end of this year. But the other point you mentioned, I think, is really important is, when you look at nickel deposits, they're often ending up as you find a cluster of them. Sometimes they're one-offs, but if you look at where the bulk of the world's nickel supply and resource comes from, it's from a half a dozen nickel districts globally. And we think, what we have in the Timmins area is going to be one of those next big nickel districts. And Crawford is the first of what will hopefully be a whole series of very large nickel discoveries going forward.
Great. And yeah, I had the pleasure of visiting the Timmins area earlier this spring, and was really reminded of what a mining friendly camp that is. As I was on a plane with a whole bunch of people that were pretty much in the mining industry, and when you arrive at the airport, there's buses from mining companies there to pick up people, and then you have all the services in town there, assay labs, drilling companies, the various things that you need, as well as experienced personnel to help move a project forward.
Yeah, that's what I think a lot of investors, don't pay attention to. It's great to make a great discovery, but it's almost as important or even more important for that discovery to be in that kind of a location. All of the major infrastructure we need is already in place. The other key part you make there in terms of people, to build a big project, you need a lot of human capital. And the fact that we've got more than 80,000 people, who are within an hour's drive of the mine site is excellent. And again, the depth of skills and consulting support and services support in the area, is second to none. So I'm very, very fortunate to be in that location. And the other part, again, in a market that's very focused on low carbon, if you end up having to fly people in or fly supplies in or drive supplies in down a very long road, the carbon footprint can build up very, very quickly. We're fortunate to have rail nearby, highways nearby, and we won't have to fly anybody in and out to get to site. So, that in combination with the fact that Ontario is one of the few jurisdictions globally that has a low carbon electricity grid, and the fact that our tailings and waste rock have this great property that when they're exposed to air, they spontaneously absorb CO2. We think will be not only a low carbon operation, but with the carbon offset from the carbon capture from the tailings and waste rock, that we could be a zero carbon or even negative carbon operation, going forward, which is, ideally what the market's looking for.
Great. Absolutely. And then, you definitely have the infrastructure there as well. I remember, seeing the paved road going north of Timmins, as well as not one, but two big power lines heading up in that general direction. And, that's a big advantage as far as, looking forward to potentially constructing a mining project there.
Yeah, no. And again, even the terrain in terms of this is an area that was owned by a forestry company for many, many decades. It has been logged multiple times. So again, as we now move into the permitting process, the fact that there's no significant flora, fauna, the area has been disturbed by other industrial activity. It helps, will make it a much easier, faster process to get through the permitting process, which once we get the feasibility study done this year is going to be, a key focus of activities going forward. Absolutely.
It's permitting is still a process, certainly, and for good reason. I mean, we want things to be done right, but something that I chatted about a little bit earlier was projects in such places as Minnesota in the Duluth complex, as well as, the Ring of Fire up in Northern Ontario. And these are places that either have more, with Minnesota, it's been a a slow process. Some companies have gone through in the permitting side of things, and there's been some, well, perhaps they'll eventually be built. There are some challenges on that side, and then the Ring of Fire. Obviously, you don't have that infrastructure up there, and that would be a bit of a hurdle for what otherwise might be a rich deposit in that region.
Yeah, we're super fortunate. If you drew a 200-kilometer radius around Timmins, you would pick up 4 of the 6 biggest gold and base metal projects that have been permitted or built in the last 15 years. You've got a Cisco and Detour, very successful large-scale gold operations, in that radius. And right now, just down to the southwest of us, in a more remote location, but still within that kind of zip code, IAMGOLD's Côté project with his joint venture with Sumitomo Metal Mining. So again, in a world, and even in Canada, where a lot of large scale resource projects have really faced a lot of community and First Nations pushback in terms of getting advanced, we're in a really good location on that front, and again, with the well-established permitting processes, you have to do the work. You can't take any shortcuts. But again, having done it before with Dumont, we've got a bunch of the same key team members. We expect to be able to to make our way through the permitting process, in about as timely fashion as any project would be able to do.
Great. And then you had touched a little bit on the carbon side of things, and can you tell us a little more? I know that you have some strong background in that space. Can you tell us more about how this project would differ, obviously, from the laterite projects and other things that are out there, in terms of its environmental impact and specifically in the carbon footprint?
Yeah, so for nickel consumers, one of the big challenges globally is that there's a huge portion of nickel supply which has a massive carbon footprint associated with it, and that's been the growth of what's called nickel pig iron in Indonesia and China. And basically, what you're doing is taking a ton of soggy dirt and melting it using a lot of electricity, and all that electricity in Indonesia comes from coal-fired generation, and even more carbon to turn it into metal. And so, and that's been more than 100% of the supply growth over the last 6 years. So, we're fortunate, where in Ontario, there's only a half a dozen or so jurisdictions that really do have a very low carbon electricity grid available. So, that is one of the key enablers that allows us to get going. The other thing that really helps on the carbon footprint perspective, again, is all that infrastructure in place, which will allow you to move materials in and out of the site with as low a carbon footprint as possible. And then in terms of the other major element is in terms of the project itself, the one mining scale right now, where you have you've had and actually had for quite a while mining equipment available, is for the largest scale open pit mine mill operations, that you have trolley trucks available, you have electric shovels that are also electric. And so, being a large scale operation with low carbon electricity and being able to utilize that kind of fleet, allows us to have a low carbon footprint to start with. And again, the process that our tailings and waste rock, there's a whole class of nickel deposits called ultramafic nickel deposits, and that ultramafic rock that they're hosted in has this ability that once it's exposed to air, it geochemically needs to grab a CO2 molecule if it's available, and it converts itself into this mineral called magnesite, which is a magnesium carbonate mineral, and that permanently sequesters the CO2. So all we need to do to be able to do that is basically try and accelerate and make sure that our tailings and waste rock have the maximum chance to be able to be exposed to the CO2, so we can maximize the carbon uptake, and again have the measurement systems in place so that we can clearly document just how much carbon our tailings are capturing.
Great. And then looking at obviously a big area of interest as we start looking to new frontiers in nickel deposits is the metallurgical side. Obviously, looking backward at laterites, that was a challenge. Took a bit longer and to bring those into production than initially planned. But you've had some advances on the metallurgical side. You've had some press releases recently with some encouraging results, and obviously some of that is proprietary in terms of the details. But can you tell us a little more about what you're seeing in that way, and maybe how that could impact the economics of the project?
Yeah, so these ultramafic nickel deposits, there's a process that takes the nickel out of minerals that aren't recoverable by traditional flotation and puts them into minerals that you can. So, we're mining these deposits, and again, you can use very standard milling flotation steps to be able to recover that nickel. You can't recover all of it. So some of it still resides in those minerals, but this is an area that's still relatively new. And so the good thing is that means you still have room to make some significant improvements. And so, we've been very happy. The grandparent of these deposits is a project called Mount Keith in Western Australia that's been operating successfully now for, almost close to 30 years. The Dumont project, which I advanced in my past life with RNC Minerals, was another example of that. And so we started with the Dumont flow sheet, but we continue to make additional enhancements, and we see some real significant recovery improvements. We're targeting 4 to 5. Each of those recovery points is worth $90 million of NPV. And so, the fact that we've been able to get 6 to 16% recovery improvements is outstanding. So, it's still, we're going to have a range of recoveries from 30 to 60%. But, we've been very, very encouraged by the work we've done to date.
Great. I think, I'm trying to think of anything else here, but obviously, what we might.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, can you hear me now, Timothy?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi. Sorry, great apologies. I apologize for the mic issues, and that's why you can't see me. I'm just on another computer to try to jump in here.
Okay.
Yeah, so sorry about that. I don't know what part you're at right now, but I know you've covered quite a bit of the company.
Yes, indeed.
I think that it might be best to maybe just have Mark, if I could do an interview with you in the next few days and we could put something out. I apologize for this inconvenience for everyone. And Timothy, I really appreciate that you were able to jump in here. But if you can kind of let me know where you're at right now, and I can kind of jump in.
Sure. We had talked a little about the project in general, about metallurgy, the carbon footprint, some of the advantages of being in the Timmins area. But but perhaps I guess maybe next I would have looked to ask is kind of plans looking forward here. What's happening with the company currently, and what can we look forward to in the coming weeks and months?
Yeah,
sure.
So
maybe
go ahead.
I can ask something that's kind of stock related in regards to. I mean, right now we've seen it's a pretty choppy market. So whenever someone new who is may not have heard of you, because we have a lot of generalist investors, they would look and say, "Oh, the stock is down a bit. What's happened?" And I think there's a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with the great shape that nickel's looking in, but it would look like a great opportunity right now for someone to get into the company as it stands.
Yeah, no, for sure. We're unfortunately in one of those cycles where when interest rates go up, U.S. dollar goes up. Typically you see commodity prices fall and then mining equities fall as well. And commodity prices are hanging in there, and nickel prices have remained unchanged through this whole period. But when you look at the broader basket of mining equities, everything is sold anywhere from 20 to 40% off right now. The key thing is, battery metals, EV demand was up over 100% last year for nickel for the EV sector. We're already on the same trajectory of over 100% growth in the first few months of the year. So, if you can see through the noise, the nickel equities and us, along with them, is a very, very attractive entry point. If you go back to the prior nickel super cycle back in 2001, 2007, and nickel is one of those minerals that goes through these big super cycles every 15 to 20 years. We went through one in the late 60s, another one in the late 80s, and the one in the mid 2000s. If you got into names like FNX and Lion Ore and so forth, a lot of those were 10, 20 plus baggers at that point in time. And so, I would really, really view this price pullback as a great entry point into what is going to be, a big decade long move in the EV sector.
I don't have the presentation in front of me, but I believe that $1.2 billion you were putting on that PA from last year, was that like a $6.90 nickel, something around there?
It was $17,000 a ton, which is $7.75 a pound. Today's nickel price is trading around $15 a pound.
Yes.
Yeah. And we've already seen a number of analysts move up the longer term price forecast into the $9 or $10 a pound range. And just to give you some idea of how much torque we have to the nickel prices, every 75 cents or so is worth about 300 million US NPV. So, or about $3 a share. So some $3 US at torque. So it's really, and we'll see how the year goes on. Nickel LME closed down about 6 weeks ago because there was such a fundamental imbalance in the market, and nickel prices have really hung in at this $15 a pound level.
Yeah, it seems like we were talking earlier, Timothy and I, that that range certainly seemed to jump up, and I don't see anything in the near term between shipping costs. We've got inflation. Even if there was peace with Russia, trust has been broken. There's an impact on the market that way. Moving forward, the price looks pretty robust for most commodities, never mind nickel alone, but also that desire to have a shorter chain of custody and supply chain for battery makers and users. I think having a project in Timmins is a huge plus. Never mind, there's the whole carbon net zero kind of angle that you have, where I think moving forward, not only will it be just the sheer capital cost and what's your return going to be on a project, it'll be what is the environmental impact on it. And that score, I think, might be a very strong benefit to you.
Oh no, for sure. No, we had some discussion in terms of that mechanism, and again, consumers increasingly, every consumer would like to have a lower carbon alternative, and then given the demand coming from the EV sector, they definitely want to have low carbon nickel available. And so, we're very, very, very well positioned on that front going forward. And then in terms of the broader supply chain, 60% of the world's nickel is basically China or Chinese controlled parts of Indonesia, where that production comes from. Another 20% of what is available for the rest of the world comes from Russia. And so that was part of the catalyst for the big squeeze that happened to nickel about 6 weeks ago. But all that's done is really focus most of consumers that, security of your supply chain is becoming an increasingly important issue. I think has gone from 10 years ago, didn't worry about it so much. Everybody trades nicely to maybe being a 4 or 5, and maybe with Chinese aggression, sort of getting to 7 out of 10. It's now a 9 or 10 out of 10 for most major nickel consumers. And so, that just puts us in an even better position, as one of the very few sources of nickel supply that's close to auto plants in the US, close to auto plants in Europe. And so, we're already getting some knocks at the door, and I think there's a little bit of a lineup starting. So we'll see how we go from here.
No, of course, we want to talk about the knocks on the door, but we can't. But I'm sure we'll be keeping our ears peeled. But on top of that is the size and scope of the project. And I know people say, well, it's kind of low grade, but it's such a large amount that's something a major is they're certainly willing to overcome. Okay, grade's not as high, but the sheer quantity is something that'll be very attractive to a major.
Oh no, for sure. I mean, when you look at the copper space, the big guys, BHP, Rio Tinto, they don't own small high grade copper mines. What they own is very large scale. And because the larger scale in copper, they tend to be lower grade. So, we just think that the nickel market is going to go where copper has already gone before. And again, most of the copper industry is building projects in remote places up in the Andes, because that's all that's left. Our large low grade nickel deposit is in a great location just outside Timmins with all the major infrastructure in place. And so, we think over the next few years, the majors and the markets are going to realize that, just how valuable having this amount of nickel this close with all that infrastructure around is going to be. And, again, I think it's going to be a very exciting couple of years for us.
So tell me what I think when I jumped in here was, what are some things that someone's looking today and they say, listen, I like this, and I like the return, the value, I like the story that there's an eco kind of angle to it, and I believe the whole battery story. What are some things in the near term that are that you could talk about that we should be keeping an eye on in milestones and whatnot?
Sure. So we just completed a $50 million financing with help from Red Cloud, which leaves us well financed through next year. We started the formal permitting process, which will kick that off. We'll have a resource update where we're targeting, a 50 to 100% increase in the resource that'll be used in our feasibility study, which itself will come out before year end. You'll see community and First Nations agreements in place, through the course of the year. And then the other big thing is, in addition to Crawford, we think we have a regional package that, we're going to unlock some other Crawfords as we move through. And so you'll see a whole series of regional exploration announcements that'll be coming down the pipe in the near future here that, we think will also be very, very exciting.
Excellent. I know it doesn't hurt that between the Defense Act with Biden in the U.S. acknowledging the need for critical metals and really taking affirmative action that way. Also, they acknowledge from Canada, I think they're putting $2 billion towards kind of the battery energy space / mining. There's an acknowledgement there. I think if we get a bit more kind of cheerleading from that side of things, the general population might become a bit more aware, and that's part of it, is the education, and be aware that not only are we a resource country that can do this correctly in a strong regulatory framework and whatnot, is that there's lots of profit to be made as we reshape this vision of the world moving forward.
No, agreed. There's going to be a fundamental realignment in metal supply chains, and again, we're extremely well positioned to take advantage of it.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate both you, Timothy and Mark, for coming on. I really apologize once again for the technical issues we had here, but it's a fantastic opportunity, and nickel is really in the limelight right now, and it holds such a strong place moving forward. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew. Take care.
Thank you.